Hello. Thank you for tuning into the video. If you enjoy listening to scary stories, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I upload on a daily basis, and any support would be greatly appreciated. Today, I have 5 true scary stories that were given to me. And now, let's begin. I was 25 when this happened, living in New Mexico at the time. I had moved there a couple of years earlier for work, managing inventory at a small warehouse just outside of Albuquerque. It wasn't a dream job, but it paid the bills, and the quiet desert landscape grew on me. One night, I was driving back home from visiting a friend in Santa Fe. It was late, past midnight, and the stretch of highway was almost deserted. My gas tank was running low, so I pulled off at this tiny gas station in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place that had 2 pumps, a flickering neon sign, and a single attendant who looked half asleep behind the counter. As I stepped out of my car to fill up, I noticed him. A man standing by his car, a dusty old pickup parked at the pump next to mine. At first glance, he seemed ordinary enough. Worn jeans, a faded flannel shirt, and a cap pulled low over his face. But it was the way he stood there, not moving, just watching me, that sent a shiver up my spine. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just waiting for his turn. I focused on the pump, watching the numbers climb, but when I glanced back, he was still staring, unblinking. The uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger. I decided to go inside the store to use the bathroom. As I walked past him, I kept my eyes forward, pretending not to notice. The gas station bathroom was as grimy as you'd expect, but at least it was empty. I splashed some water on my face, trying to shake off the paranoia. It's nothing, I told myself, just some weird guy. But when I came out and glanced through the store window, my heart dropped. His truck was no longer at the pump. Instead, it was parked at the far end of the lot, away from everything, and he was still sitting in it, eyes locked on me. I paid quickly, trying to act normal, and headed back to my car. I didn't look in his direction, but I felt his eyes on me the whole time. Once I was inside my car, I locked the doors and pulled out of the station as fast as I could. Relief washed over me as the gas station faded in the rearview mirror. Then, about 30 seconds down the road, my car started to drag to one side. I heard the unmistakable thump, thump, thump of a flat tire. "No way," I whispered, pulling over to the side of the road. As I stepped out to check, headlights appeared behind me. It was him. He pulled up slowly, rolling down his window with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Need some help?" he asked, far too casually. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't a coincidence. I glanced at my tire and saw the deep slash in the rubber. "Yeah, I guess so," I replied, forcing a nervous smile. My phone had no signal, and there were no other cars in sight. I figured if I played along, maybe someone else would come by. He got out, grabbing a tire iron from his truck. "Lucky I came by," he said. Lucky wasn't the word I would use. As he crouched by my car, I kept my distance. He glanced up at me, eyes narrow and calculating. "You out here all alone?" he asked. "Meeting someone up ahead," I lied. He chuckled. Not many people drive this road at night. I felt trapped. My hands were shaking as I pretended to check my phone again. No signal. He stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. Looks like you'll be here a while. My heart pounded as he took a step toward me. Then, in the distance, headlights. Another car. Without thinking, I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. The car slowed down, and a woman rolled down her window, looking confused. "Please, I need help," I blurted out. The man from the gas station froze. Then, without a word, he turned, got into his truck, and sped off into the night. The woman, though confused, offered me a ride. We drove several miles in tense silence, both glancing in the mirrors to make sure the man wasn't following us. Finally, my phone lit up with a signal, and I was able to call the police. We waited at a small roadside diner until officers arrived. Later, the police reviewed the gas station footage, but his truck never showed up on any cameras. They never found him. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if that car hadn't come along, and I never stop looking over my shoulder when I drive at night. I'm 35 years old and live in Bozeman, Montana. I moved here 5 years ago from California because I wanted a quieter life surrounded by nature. I work as a mechanic at a local shop, and while winters here can be brutal, I've always loved the snow. At least I used to. Last winter, we got hit with one of the worst snowstorms in years. It started off pretty typical. Steady snow, freezing temps, nothing unusual for Montana. But by the second day, the wind picked up and the snow didn't stop. Roads were buried, power lines went down, and the town basically shut down. I live a bit outside of town in a small cabin. It's usually peaceful, but when you're snowed in alone, it can get pretty eerie. My nearest neighbor is about a mile away, and with the storm raging outside, I knew I wouldn't be seeing anyone for a while. The first night of the storm, I settled in with some blankets and a book. Around midnight, I heard a knock at the door. It freaked me out, because who would be out in this weather? I grabbed a flashlight and carefully opened the door. No one was there, just the howling wind and snow. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just the wind rattling something. But the next night, it happened again, 3 slow knocks. When I opened the door, there were footprints in the snow leading from the woods to my porch. But no one was there. I barely slept that night. Every little noise made me jump. The next morning, I checked around the cabin. The footprints led back into the woods, but they didn't make any sense. They just stopped suddenly, like whoever made them vanished. That evening, the power went out. I lit some candles and tried to stay calm. Around 11 p.m., I heard footsteps crunching through the snow outside. Not just passing by, circling the cabin. I grabbed my rifle and shouted, "Who's there?" No answer, just the sound of someone moving around. Then, a voice, a low, calm voice I didn't recognize. "Let me in. It's cold out here." I didn't respond. My heart was pounding. The voice called out again, "Please, I need help." But something about it felt wrong. It didn't sound desperate. It sounded practiced. I stayed silent, and eventually the footsteps faded away. The next morning, I found more footprints circling the cabin over and over. I tried calling for help, but the storm had knocked out cell service. I was on my own. The third night was the worst. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something tapping on my bedroom window. I froze. My bedroom is on the second floor. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. Slowly, I peeked out. There was a face, pale, with wide, unblinking eyes, staring right at me. I stumbled back, grabbing my rifle. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the storm finally let up, I drove straight into town and told the sheriff everything. He nodded, like he'd heard similar stories before, but said there wasn't much they could do. No one else was found out there. I don't know who or what was out there during that storm, but every winter since, when the snow starts falling and the wind howls through the trees, I can't help but feel like something is still watching me, waiting for the next storm to come knocking. I was 24 when this happened, living in Oregon and working a night shift job at a local distribution center. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me afloat, and the quiet, rainy evenings in Oregon suited me. My roommate, Jason, lived upstairs in our small 2-story apartment, while I had the downstairs bedroom. We had been friends since college, and even though our work schedules didn't always match up, we shared a lot of good times. That night started like any other. I got home from work around midnight, ate a quick dinner, and collapsed into bed. I remember feeling exhausted, barely managing to set an alarm before drifting off. At some point, though, I woke up suddenly. I checked my phone. 2:04 a.m. I thought I heard something faint, like footsteps or shuffling. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just the old building creaking. But then I heard it again. It was coming from upstairs, Jason's room. Maybe he came home late, I thought. But Jason usually texted me when he got back after midnight. I got up quietly and quietly made my way upstairs. Jason's door was slightly open, just enough for me to see the darkness inside. I pushed the door open wider. Empty bed, lights off. No Jason. I whispered, "Jason." Nothing. My mind raced. Maybe he was in the bathroom or kitchen. I stepped back into the hallway, trying to keep my breathing steady. I walked to the living room, whispering his name again. Then, a loud thud came from Jason's room, the one I had just checked. I didn't wait to find out what made the noise. I bolted down the stairs, practically jumping the last few steps, and slammed my bedroom door shut. I locked it, breathing heavily. I grabbed my phone and called Jason, straight to voicemail. "Come on, pick up," I whispered to myself. No signal problems. He just wasn't answering. I sat there, heart racing, staring at my door, listening for any sound outside. After what felt like hours, I knew I couldn't stay. I quietly opened my window, climbed out into the cold night, and ran to my car, shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I drove straight to my friend Ryan's house. He was surprised to see me, but I didn't explain much. I just asked to crash on his couch. Sleep barely came. The next morning, Jason finally called me back. His voice was casual, almost cheerful, but my blood ran cold when he told me he hadn't been home at all the night before. To this day, I have no idea what I heard in that room, but I know it wasn't my imagination, and I know I never want to hear it again. I'm 28 years old, and I've lived in Portland, Oregon for the last 3 years. I work as a delivery driver for a local courier service, which isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me time to explore the city. My job takes me all over Portland. I've always liked driving around, listening to podcasts, and seeing different parts of the city most people never pay attention to. I don't really have a set route, which means every day is different. That's how I first met John. It started with a package delivery to this old house in southeast Portland. The house wasn't run down, but it had this eerie stillness to it. Overgrown bushes, a squeaky gate, and those curtains that always seemed to be drawn just a little too tightly. The first time I dropped off a package there, John came to the door. He was probably in his late 50s, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, with glasses that sat crooked on his nose. He seemed friendly enough, thanked me for the delivery, and made a joke about how he always ordered too much stuff online. After that, I started delivering to his house more often. At first, it was just once every couple of weeks, but soon it became almost a weekly thing. He'd always be there to greet me, even when I didn't need a signature. It was a little odd, but I brushed it off. Some people are just lonely, you know. One day, he asked me if I wanted a bottle of water for the road. I said sure, and he invited me in while he grabbed it from the fridge. His house was surprisingly neat, filled with books and old records. We chatted for a few minutes about music and movies. He seemed normal enough, maybe just a little awkward. After that, he'd always offer me something when I dropped by. Coffee, snacks, even a sandwich once. I usually declined, but sometimes I'd accept just to be polite. Then things started getting weird. I noticed he began to ask personal questions, harmless at first. Where I lived, if I had family in town, if I lived alone. I kept my answers vague, but it made me uneasy. One time, he mentioned seeing me at a gas station near my apartment, even though I'd never told him where I lived. I laughed it off, but it stuck with me. One night, after a long shift, I got home around 10 p.m. I parked my car and was heading up to my apartment when I saw a figure standing across the street, partially hidden by a tree. I froze. My neighborhood isn't unsafe, but it's not the kind of place you hang around late at night unless you have a reason. I squinted in the dim light, and my stomach dropped when I realized it was John. I didn't know what to do. I rushed inside, locked the door, and peeked through the blinds. He stood there for a few more minutes before walking away. My mind was racing. Why was he here? How did he find out where I lived? The next day, I told my boss I didn't want to deliver to John's address anymore. She didn't ask many questions, just reassign the route. I hoped that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. A week later, I started receiving anonymous packages. No return address, just small items like keychains, books, and once a single red rose. I knew it was him. I went to the police, but without direct threats or proof, there wasn't much they could do. One night, I woke up to a noise outside my window. I live on the ground floor, and when I pulled back the curtain, my blood ran cold. John was standing there, staring in, I grabbed my phone, called the police, and yelled that I was calling them. He ran off before they arrived, but they found footprints leading up to my window. That was enough for a restraining order. For a while, things were quiet. I changed my schedule, always looking over my shoulder, but the fear never really left. Months later, the police called me. They had arrested John for breaking into another woman's home. When they searched his house, they found something chilling. A notebook filled with details about me, my work schedule, my favorite places, even a sketch of my apartment layout. They also found keys to my apartment, which I never gave him. The thought still haunts me. What if I hadn't noticed him that night? What if he had gotten inside? John is in prison now, but I still double-check my locks every night, because sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones from stories. They're the ones living right next door. I'm 31 years old, and I've lived in Charleston, South Carolina, for most of my life. I work as a bartender at a small pub downtown, which means I meet a lot of people, some cool, some annoying, and a few who just give off the wrong vibe. This story is about one of those. It started on a slow Tuesday night. The bar was nearly empty, just a couple of regulars and me wiping down the counters. Around 9 p.m., a guy walked in. He looked about my age, wearing a plain hoodie and jeans, and had this messy, dark hair that looked like he hadn't combed it in days. He sat at the bar and ordered a beer. I tried making small talk like I always do. He was quiet, barely giving one-word answers. After finishing his drink, he left without a word. I figured that was the end of it. But the next night, he came back, same time, same seat. This time, he spoke a little more, asking me if I lived nearby. I lied and said I lived on the other side of town. Something told me not to give him any real info. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular, never causing trouble, always polite. But something was off. He'd ask strange questions, like what time I usually got off work, or if I walked home alone. I started feeling like I was being watched, even when I wasn't at the bar. One night, I closed up around 1 a.m. and started walking to my car a few blocks away. The streets were quiet, just the distant sound of traffic. As I approached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced back and saw him. I began to walk faster, unlocked my car, and jumped in, locking the doors immediately. He walked past, not even looking at me, but I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I started seeing him everywhere. At the grocery store, near my apartment, even once at the beach when I was out with friends. I told myself it was just paranoia, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then, the messages started. Handwritten notes left on my windshield saying things like, "I like your smile," or "You looked pretty last night." I never told anyone, thinking maybe I was overreacting. Until the night he tried to get in. I was home alone, watching TV, when I heard my front door handle jiggle. My blood turned to ice. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. It was him. He whispered my name through the door. I didn't even know how he knew it. I called the police, whispering so he wouldn't hear. Minutes later, I heard sirens, and he bolted. The police never found him, and he never came back into the bar. In fact, nobody even knew the guy, his name, where he lived, anything. I'm glad he's gone now, but I can't help feeling selfish for having that opinion. He's probably are there terrorizing and stalking somebody else. But I'm glad it's not me anymore.